Putin has instructed the government, the central bank, and regional authorities to restore the growth rate of the Russian economy this year, as well as to increase budget revenues through taxes. However, experts, including those loyal to the authorities, say that both of these tasks are hardly achievable. More details on how the Russian economy is plunging into the abyss coming up next.
Restore the economy and increase taxes. These two goals were set by the Russian dictator Vladimir Putin for the government, the central bank, and regional authorities in 2026. Such tasks are hardly achievable, as even experts loyal to the authorities admit.
By the end of 2025, it was already clear that the Russian economy was facing major problems. And if, let's put it this way, in the middle of 2025, only a few commentators, and not opposition figures, were talking about a technical recession, and that was closer to the end of 2025. By then, even economists close to the authorities, such as the Centers for Macroeconomic Analysis and Short-Term Forecasting, headed by the younger brother of Russia's Minister of Defense, Belousov, were already saying there would be a recession in 2026.
Since the beginning of 2025, Russia's GDP growth has been steadily slowing down, 1.1% in the first quarter and only 0.6% in the third. Russian economists were predicting that the economy would enter 2026 with zero growth and ongoing stagnation in all sectors, except the military.
By then, Russia had already experienced a negative fourth quarter. Most likely, I think they'll officially report a plus 0.1%, but in reality, it was a negative. And as for 2026, it's likely the whole year will be in decline, meaning production is falling. There may be statements that some sectors are showing success, and maybe a few individual ones well, but overall the picture is negative.
A downturn is expected for at least the first and second quarters of 2026, instead of the 1% growth that Putin demands. This has long been forecasted by the Ministry of Economy and Russian economists.
People have gotten used to paying not only with cash these days, but also with credit cards. Previously, for 25 years before this, such a thing was never charged in Russia. An extra fee for paying with non-cash methods, like credit cards. Now that's a thing of the past. Paying by credit card now means you have to pay a tax. According to calculations by Sberbank of Russia, as announced by its head German Graf, this means a loss of 200 billion rubles for Russian citizens.
To fill the budget with revenue and finance Putin's war, the authorities, of course, plan to take it from the pockets of Russians.
This will lead to an increasing number of businesses permanently closing their doors. There is already a clear trend of businesses closing in Russia, and statistics show that a significantly large number of businesses are shutting down. And if there is even more fiscal pressure, as Putin is talking about, it will mean that even more different enterprises will be forced to close.
Starting in 2025, Russia will begin to feel the first consequences of tightening its belt in the form of fuel shortages at gas stations. In 2026, it is quite possible that salaries will not be paid due to a lack of funds, which will lead to production shutdowns in most industries.
Putin's economy is collapsing, and it's not just analysts saying this anymore, but also domestic billionaires. Potanin was literally at a loss for words when describing the state of Russian business realities. Deripaska openly predicted the bankruptcy of thousands of Russian enterprises. More on what the oligarchs think about Russia's future. Coming up next.
The Kremlin's economy is rapidly falling apart.
The oil market is like an unpredictable black swan, which continues to peck away at this economy. Pipelines.
Today, it's not just independent analysts talking about this. Putin's billionaires and top officials, people who for decades have been the backbone of the system, are declaring catastrophe.
But overall, the situation in the economy, can be described as practically on its deathbed.
There are local risks across the board. They're caused by shrinking demand, by tension in the labor market, declining profitability, and reduced investment activity.
What they tried to mask with propaganda about resilience and adaptation is now obviously. Business in Russia is suffocating, and the economy is entering a phase of prolonged collapse. For example, Oleg Deripaska, one of the richest people in Russia and the founder of the giant Rusal, has effectively admitted the failure of the Kremlin's economic policy.
This specific legal action and the subsequent financial restrictions were aimed at Oleg Deripaska directly, the prominent Russian industrialist and billionaire who has faced extensive international scrutiny and significant economic sanctions due to his close ties with the Kremlin and his influential role within the global aluminum industry.
Talks about the onerous loans from state banks, absurdly high interest rates, and the overvalued ruble, which doesn't protect against inflation, but instead destroys production. Previously, businesses could refinance at 13 to 15%. Now they are forced to borrow at 26 to 35%. For most companies, this is a death sentence. Economists agree with this conclusion from Putin's wallet, but when it comes to the businessmen's proposals regarding the ruble exchange rate,
it is absolutely essential to recognize that these specific elements are critical and play a fundamental role in the overall success of the operation. Devaluation of the ruble, because then it devalues ruble-denominated costs, while the revenues they get from exporting aluminum and other raw materials are maximized. This, of course, leads to rising cost of money, impoverishment of the population, and a decline in
and the overall pressure on business has driven the economy into a state that can hardly be called anything other than a struggle for survival.
Of course, there is the tax increase. We all understand why taxes are being raised, and we have the right attitude about it. But this leads to the fact that right now we are going through a period, I would say, well, a period. I don't want to use the word survival, but it's a period when business is truly being tested. Entire industries are being tested for viability.
The so-called Putin's military boom has run its course after several years in which the budget poured tens of trillions of rubles into military factories. Even according to official data, the economy of the aggressor country has sharply slowed down. In reality, according to independent analysts' calculations, Russia's GDP fell in 2025.
In any country in recent years, or let's say in recent decades, there is a direct correlation between the volume of passenger air travel and the dynamics of gross domestic product. Through some minor reasoning, I concluded that for Russia, a coefficient of 1.3 is more appropriate. So, what does that mean? Since passenger air travel sharply declined in 2025, naturally, GDP also fell. What interested me was the actual figure. The drop in GDP in 2025. And now I can say that GDP in 2025 fell by at least 2.2%. So 2.2% is the lower threshold, let's say. It's actually more than that. A 2% drop in GDP by the end of 2025.
This means that production volumes in the terrorist country have significantly decreased. Metallurgy, chemicals, engineering, all are in the red. Surveys of top managers at the largest enterprises show that the sales situation is the worst it has been since 1998. The decline is visible in the basic indicators of the economy. Russian Railways has recorded the deepest drop in freight traffic in 16 years. Everything is falling, from coal and metals to grain and building materials. This is a direct signal. Production is shrinking, the investment cycle is coming to a halt. Experts acknowledge that railway statistics usually lead other indicators and clearly point to an economic slowdown. The figures were already critical in the last month of autumn.
Transport freight turnover, for example, a key indicator that reflects the entire economic dynamic, fell by almost 1% over 11 months and by 3% in November.
Even enterprises in the military-industrial complex are howling in despair.
Very serious financial and economic problems in Russian military production are hidden behind a veil of secrecy. This surfaces from time to time. In fact, the director and head of the Rostec Corporation, Sergei Chemezov, regularly talks about this topic in his interviews and public statements. We have also told you about this in detail. For example, at the end of August, in a major interview with RIA Novosti, he also said that many enterprises have almost zero profitability, if not negative, and are barely surviving.
And so on. And those enterprises for which money is supposedly spared no expense are actually operating at a loss. After all, payment for the machines of killing comes to them from the Kremlin with serious delays.
Roughly the same issue was raised by the first deputy chairman of the State Duma Committee on Economic Policy, State Duma Deputy Denis Kravchenko. Here, he actually explains the mechanics. Military production has no other market. They still receive orders through the state defense contract, but they don't get paid right away, only after the delivery of the finished products. But they still need to buy raw materials, supplies, and pay salaries. So they are inevitably forced to take out loans at these outrageous interest rates. All of this ends up being very expensive. And many of the military enterprises, attention, this is openly acknowledged at the official level, are operating at a loss.
Crisis since last year is the Russian metallurgy industry.
The situation's difficult, and overall it's getting worse. Well, first of all, I don't think I'm saying anything new here. It is quite clearly evident that the entirety of this situation is, by and large, a consequence of the economic slowdown policy that we're seeing at this current moment, which is being implemented.
The key company in the industry, Severstal, has significantly reduced production.
Another sector that's absolutely in the dumps with no prospects in sight. Production has decreased by 5%. Steel production as of the end of 2025. And here, Kommersant is also publishing a big analytical article about the market, saying that a quick recovery in the industry is not expected.
Sanctions and falling demand have led to a reduction in exports and job losses at factories.
Expensive loans, no opportunities for export, no domestic demand. There's no hope for metallurgists either. Remember how last year the director of Severstal, Shevelev, said they'd have to cut back and close enterprises? And that process is already well underway. So basically in 2026, I think we'll see a process of mass shutdowns on a scale we haven't seen yet, because they've been holding on until now. This was possible because some existing reserves were injected into the economy.
And while large corporations are cutting work weeks and laying off staff, but not shutting down completely yet, small and medium-sized businesses are being forced out of the market. In the aggressor country, cafes, restaurants, and sushi bars are closing en masse. Thousands of establishments have disappeared over the past year. Formats aimed at the middle class, which itself is rapidly becoming poorer, are dying out especially quickly. The rate of growth in Russian spending on restaurants has dropped sharply.
Shokoladnitsa is closing more than 10% of its cafes in Moscow. There are very, very big problems with profits, rising costs, staff shortages, and low consumer demand. Purchasing power has plummeted, rent is expensive, and loans are extremely costly. There is no profit.
Instead of helping businesses, the Russian authorities are planning to tighten price regulation in retail trade.
Now, not only the Federal Anti-Monopoly Service, but also the Prosecutor General's Office is monitoring prices in Russia. Basically, if inflation starts to accelerate significantly, retailers will be forced to keep prices down. This will lead to retailers operating at a loss. Then the retailers they'll go to the government asking for subsidies, but they won't get them because no one gets subsidies. There's no money for that. And then there will be a contraction of retail trade. And if you squeeze the retail sector, like I said, it will start going bankrupt.
But that's just the tip of the iceberg. Russia has been hit by a record wave of business defaults since the start of the war. Dozens of companies have failed to meet their debt obligations. The reason is simple. Old debts accumulated during the cheap years now have to be refinanced at new draconian rates. Cash gaps, rising overdue payments, falling demand. All of this quickly turns into a systemic crisis. Analysts are openly warning that there will be even more defaults in the coming year. Their number will likely increase by another 10 to 20% compared to 2025. And it won't just be individual companies under threat, but entire sectors. Against this backdrop, the Kremlin is not easing the pressure. On the contrary, it's tightening the screws. Putin is demanding a significant increase in tax collections. The government is raising VAT, increasing the profit tax, restricting simplified procedures for small businesses, and introducing new levies on equipment. In effect, the aggressor state is trying to squeeze the last money out of the economy to continue its war against Ukrainians. As a result, Russia is driving itself into an economic dead end, and the standard of living for Russians is rapidly declining, since they are literally paying for the war out of their own pockets.